Seems like based on Josh's poll, most of you are actually practitioners of data science, so this topic might not be completely relevant to you, so I'll at least try to keep it entertaining. I'm really disappointed, though, that Mike stole my joke about AI being done in PowerPoint. I think there's another version of the joke, which I'm going to tell now, just so I can get it out of the way, which is that what's the difference between Python and machine learning and AI? Machine learning is done in Python, AI is done in PowerPoint, so that's the other version of the joke. So let me know afterwards which one you prefer. So I'm here to talk about building a center of excellence for data science, and it's kind of funny because I've always actually not been a big fan of the term center of excellence. So I took this job last July of 2018, and I was basically told, okay, you're now going to build the center of excellence for data science. I was like, okay, I basically face-palmed, and I said, okay, how can I come up with a better term than center of excellence, right? And so I've kind of shifted gears a little bit, and so that's why I'm willing to stand in front of you today to talk about this. And so we'll try to keep it interactive, and so we've actually got live polling, and so now you actually have a reason to use your cell phone other than being bored by my talk. And there is a URL as well that you can use for if you have a computer and don't have a cell phone. So I'm gonna just leave that up a little bit, and for you guys to get that done. So I'll count down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. For those of you that aren't millennials or Gen Z, I'm sorry, I'm adjusting my speed for that audience. Okay, so a little bit about HCSC. So HCSC operates as Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois, Montana, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas. And so I'm not going to read those stats out to you, but just a kind of interesting fact is that most people don't realize that there's actually 36 different Blue Cross Blue Shield plans across the United States that operate independently. And we are the second largest Blue and the largest nonprofit one. And the largest one is Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield. For some reason, they're one of the few Blues that's actually for-profit. And the association, which owns the brand and does a heck of a job of marketing our brand, is also located in Chicago, but they actually don't sell any insurance. So we cover about 70% of the folks in Illinois have our plan. So generally, I just take a quick poll, who has our plan insurance, and about 70% of you raise your hand, yeah. Okay, so there are 3 key takeaways from today's session. And so number 1 is we're actually going to kind of define and talk through exactly what a center of excellence is. And as you'll see in a second, I'm guessing most of you probably can't define it well, but we'll check my instinct there. The second one is apply a really simple framework, and some of you have gotten some handouts. As you can see, it all fits on one page, so when I say it's simple, it actually is simple. And we'll go through that exercise at the end of the presentation, and then do a little bit of discussion as well as Q&A. And then finally, talk about what actually makes an effective versus an ineffective center of excellence, and talk through some of those practical considerations. So those 3 things are what I want you to take away from today's presentation. All right, the first poll of the day. The question is, do you know what a center of excellence is? And so those are your options. And BS means backside, right? Okay. So let's see what we have. Okay, so it's mostly headed towards B. You have a vague idea, so and we'll see why in a second. And I'm actually really surprised that there's less D's than I thought, mainly because that if I actually picked an option, that's probably what I would have picked before I actually led the center of excellence. Okay, it's still going. Oh, interesting. Apparently, the clicker does not work for this. Would someone sitting there kindly press the right arrow button on my computer? I appreciate it. Okay, thank you. All right, so of course, when you want to know what something is, you go to Wikipedia, right? So that's what I did. So I pulled up some definitions from Wikipedia of what a center of excellence is. And really, I think I would probably agree with all 3 of these. And the middle one, I think, is actually the most accurate, which is that really it has completely different characteristics depending on the context. And we'll talk about why that's actually appropriate and not just because it's a BS term. So another interesting question, which is, have you ever seen an ineffective center of excellence? Okay, I'm really curious about the results of this one. And the reason I ask this is because, I think there's something like 50 or 60 center of excellences at my company, and I really don't know what most of them do. And so hopefully people actually know what our center of excellence for data science does. And I know this is a little bit fluffy at this point, but we'll really get into the meat in a second. And so most of you are picking B or C, and some of you actually picked A, which is kind of interesting. So I would like to know where you were. Come talk to me afterwards. But generally, I find that Center of Excellence are really ineffective. And I'll get into reasons why in a second. So moving on. Okay, here's my definition of a successful Center of Excellence. I'm actually going to read this to you because I didn't memorize it when I wrote it down, so I'm going to turn around now. A successful Center of Excellence for data science drives and enables organizational level transformation of processes and workflows through embedding advanced analytics and machine learning solutions into decision-making and actions that create real value. Okay, I can do that one breath. And as you can see, it's wordy, but it's also a little bit aspirational, right? But I think for a true Center of Excellence for data science to actually be successful, it actually has to meet this criteria. And there's a couple of keywords and phrases down there I want to talk about, which is it has to both drive and enable. And it actually has to be indifferent between those two. So whether it gives people the power to do data science or whether it actually delivers the data science itself, there can't be a preference for one over the other. Second one is actually organizational level transformation, right? So if you're not able to achieve that, then you're not really getting, you don't have a successful Center of Excellence. And then finally, it's real value, right? So a lot of Center of Excellence turn into, you have working sessions where people write out guidelines and processes and they get posted somewhere and then people don't really follow them. So here's a highly simplified view of the different structures that different data science organizations can take on. And this is a really highly simplified view. We'll get into a little bit of the complex view in a second. So on the right side, you have the centralized. This is like one giant data science team. A lot of data science teams actually start this way at organizations. And I've seen them collapse at a lot of different organizations. So the most public one was for insurance was at AIG. So they set up a science team in 2014 and they invested $100 million into their science team from 2014 to 2017. Has anyone actually worked at AIG data science? Okay, so it's primarily, it was based out of New York, I think. So essentially what they found was at the end of that period, that entire investment had actually delivered very, very little real ROI. And the reason that I've heard is because they were really focused on the technology. So you get a bunch of really smart PhDs together, and you ask them, okay, here's some data, now go solve problems. What they're going to do is they're going to focus on the coolest algorithms, the coolest technologies, right? They're not going to really try to connect to the business. And when you have one giant data science organization, if the leadership isn't aggressive about pushing those data scientists to talk to the business, they lose sight very quickly about what actually they're there for to do, which is to solve real business problems. There's some huge advantages, though, to a centralized model. The first one is that it's actually really easy to get a lot of money. I've seen this everywhere. The fastest data science growth I've seen are at companies where they start off with one centralized team. And that team generally blows up into a couple hundred data scientists very, very fast. And they can also do things like stand up infrastructure. So before cloud, you had Hadoop. And people had giant data lakes. And the companies that were able to move most aggressively and fast along that path were the companies that had that centralized model. And that actually didn't help the fact that all these data scientists also had really access to all these cool technologies, right? So then it became a matter of how can we actually work with big data, right? Regardless of the value. So an early story from when I first started was we were really excited about working with unstructured transactions. So whenever you go to the physician or doctor, they ask for your insurance card. What happens then is generally they send us an electronic request, so it's known as an RTE, to the insurer, and we basically respond, says, yes, Michael is covered by Blue Cross Blue Shield, and here are his benefits. And they just say, okay, now you're insured, right? So we can provide services to you. So in my previous company, we had around 3 billion of these, and they were in text files, and so it's unstructured. And it's like, this is really cool data. Let's spend tons of time and money turning this data into features that we can use for our model that we think is good. So at the end of the day, actually, that feature didn't actually have any impact on the model. But it was really cool because then you could talk about how you worked with billions of unstructured data sets, right? And I actually think may still have it on my resume because some people are still impressed by that. So then we have on the far side the decentralized model. And generally this happens when certain business areas within a company recognize the need for data science solutions faster than the rest of the company. And so they go out and they basically just hire their own data scientists. And this is actually what happened at Blue Cross Blue Shield. And we'll go in a bit, one of the slides covers the timeline of that. So this actually has some advantages, mainly because the business actually recognized the need, which means that there are real problems that they think they can be solved with data science. And those data scientists sit with their business partners, and they actually see the core operational aspects of what the business does. And so they tend to be able to actually not lose sight of those business problems and solve them, right? But then you face other challenges. Let's say you have a small team of 5 or 10 that are sitting within a business unit. Well, what about infrastructure? Can that team actually fund a giant data lake? No. What about technology, right? Can they actually go out and afford to buy a platform? And generally the answer is no. So there's a trade-off there, right, between having access to all the latest and coolest and greatest versus being actually tied to the business and solving real problems. And then, of course, you've got the hybrid in the middle, which really seeks to get the best of both worlds. And I think the challenge there is the collaboration, right? So now you've inserted the centralized team, the center of excellence, into the structure, and you've said now you've got to coordinate across all of these teams. But generally, the center of excellence doesn't actually have formal authority. So how do you actually get all of these teams to cooperate with you? And then how do you actually decide what the focus areas of the center of excellence should be? So we're going to get to that in a bit. Okay, so just kind of out of curiosity, which of these actually structures best describes your organization? I'm kind of curious to see what the current distribution is. Okay, so it's actually a solid mix of all three, which is kind of what I expected to see. If I had asked this maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I probably would have actually expected B to be by far the smallest or the least likely response. At the time, it was basically mostly A and C, but then what's happened is companies have moved towards B. But then you've got all these infinite varieties of B, so if we go to the next slide. Okay, so before we get into that, first of all, why wouldn't you want a center of excellence? Well, if you don't have any data science capabilities, right, so do you really want a center of excellence? So the only instance where you might want that is if you think, okay, I really can't hire a lot of data scientists, so I want some data scientists in a center of excellence, and then I want them to go out and upskill the rest of my existing workforce so that they can do data science. The issue I see with that is I think there's actually a very small population of what can be considered citizen data scientists. So we've kind of done that at Blue Cross Blue Shield, and if we look at the people that actually, we can train them in a short period of time and have them actually build data science are basically statisticians. And there's probably, only 15 to 20 that aren't already data scientists at our company. So that population tends to be pretty small. And for most statisticians, I think it was Josh that said that, they've already decided to move into data science because they can just get a 20% pay bump immediately. And then the second one, which is probably a little bit rarer, if you're a tech company or if you're an AI company or a machine learning company, then probably this is true, which is that data science is actually already part of your company. So you really don't need a center of excellence because pretty much everyone knows what they're doing. And so having this central coordinating function is not really helpful or beneficial. Okay, so the real idea, though, is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all hybrid organization or way to set up a center of excellence. And you can see I've included some words that I've heard thrown around, right? Like federated. I personally don't like that term. I like the term embedded a little more. There's functional ones where each function has its own data science team. Then there's product-based ones where each product has its own data science team. I've seen democratic thrown around a lot, again, but I think the idea for most companies, traditional companies, that's just like a pipe dream for 10 years in the future, right, or even longer. And then I've seen others say, okay, you should have a consulting mindset, right? So the center of excellence basically just does consulting. Okay, so which of these is actually true? And I would say probably none of them, because really the idea is you should really think about the center of excellence as picking from a menu of options of things that the center of excellence could potentially move either in a centralized fashion or in a decentralized or have some hybrid. And so what I have done here is I've basically listed some of the things that a center of excellence should think about, and this isn't exhaustive, I'm not going to read it out to you. But the idea is that you can actually select and tailor these based on what your needs are. So I've pointed out some examples for each of these, and so I'm going to actually go and just let you read this real quick, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show where Blue Cross Blue Shield is right now and talk through why we decided to actually be centralized, hybrid, or decentralized for each of these. Okay, so here's the simple framework. And when I sat down and I took this role back in July, it was actually just me. And we actually went through 3 to 4 months of organizational design. And so I had a lot of time to think about how do we actually design the center of excellence and actually learn from previous examples of failed center of excellences, including at our company. And this is kind of what I came up with. And so I think there are basically 4 things, right? So number one, which is how accepted is a practice, right? So how standardized is a practice? So I'll go through an example later. So one would be like, compensation, right? Do you want your internal teams all paying your data scientists differently? I think the answer is probably no, because what's going to happen is that you're actually going to get into a bidding war internally. And not only that, some teams are going to be very competitive and some teams aren't going to be competitive. So actually what you need to do is say, okay, here's the market research, here's the offers we've made, and here's what's been accepted and here's what's not. So the second one is business driven. And so I probably should have called this more core business. But the idea is there are certain things where you're getting an advantage by being close to the business and understanding how the business operates in a day-to-day fashion. So this is really something like execution, right? So if you actually sit down with your business partner, like if you sit down with your customer service folks every day, or you sit in the same meetings with them, you inherently understand what their challenges and problems are. So as a team that's not in the center of excellence, that's embedded or federated or functional or product-based or whichever way you'd like to structure it, at that point, those teams are much better able to execute on those use cases compared to a central team. The third one is scale. So this is probably the easiest one to think about. So an example would be infrastructure, right? So if you need a large data lake, you probably don't want one of the spoke teams to go out and stand up the infrastructure because they just simply don't have the money. Or other things like recruiting, right? Do you want each of your individual teams to go out and recruit if you have 8 different teams and hire people? And the fourth one is maturity, and this is really about the overall level of maturity, both at the organization and within specific teams. So again, if your organization is really, really mature, then the center of excellence should probably be very, very small or non-existent. If it's less mature, then I'll talk about why in a second. The center of excellence actually needs to be bigger because then it's also focused on executing use cases and identifying gaps in the company where there aren't already those spoke teams. Okay, so I can't remember how I came up with these, so let's go through this. So basically what I said is, okay, out of the things I've listed on the left side, and if I'm applying those those three things, so accepted practice, business-driven, and scale, does it indicate that a function should be more centralized or more decentralized? And so I'll try to talk through my thinking. So I put this together about 3 weeks ago, so I'm trying to recall this. So execution. So I think generally people accept now that if you have a data science team within like a product or function or business area, they actually should execute the use cases, right? Not the central area. Mainly because, again, they understand the core and fundamental operations of that business area or product. Business-driven, we talked about that a little bit, strongly towards decentralization. Scale, obviously, you can't get scale if you have a smaller team embedded within a business area, so that just naturally tends to favor having a central team. Hiring and recruiting, I think it's just because of the scale issues. For most of you, most of companies, right, they probably are hiring a lot of data scientists. If you're not hiring a lot of data scientists, obviously the scale doesn't really matter. But for a company like us, and we'll get into the stats in a little bit, we've hired 30 data scientists over the past 9 months or so. And so for us to do that, let's say we all have to go out and recruit separately. We all have our own recruiters. It makes it very, very inefficient. And so now we can go out and collectively pull people from 3 teams and visit a potential school that has students that we might want to hire. Compensation, we talked about a little bit. So technology is a little bit interesting. So technology would cover platforms, right? And so you get back to this issue of funding. If you're like a small team, you just don't have, if you have 5 or 10 data scientists, a platform is going to probably be prohibitively expensive to you because then you have to stand up the infrastructure to put the platform on. You have to pay for it, and generally there's some sort of fixed cost component to those platforms. So I'm just going to cover a little bit. So community, I'm actually going to skip the rest, and we'll, in the Q&A, if you guys want me to talk about any of these, I'll come back to them. Okay, so a little bit about Blue Cross Blue Shield and how we're organized, and I'll talk a little bit about our journey as well. So some quick facts. We currently have 60 data scientists, product managers, and then data science engineers. So those are our 3 primary roles on our data science teams. So when I first started at HCSC, or Blue Cross Blue Shield, of Illinois, Montana, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas, there were around 10 to 15 data scientists. So 3 years later, we're up to 60. We have 20 open positions right now, and we expect that we'll probably grow to around 100 by end of next year. We also have what we call an advanced analytics community. So these are folks that are like actuaries or statisticians or people that are, have some component of predictive modeling in their job, but aren't necessarily data scientists. And so we kind of bring them into the fold and basically try to upskill them a little bit, right? And then, so you look at the timeline. So essentially, HCSC formed through the decentralized model. Certain business areas hire their teams first, And then enterprise data science was actually just established last year. And then what we're actually doing now is we're actually seeding more teams within the different business units. And so I'm not going to get into our structure, but you can kind of see that we kind of have the hub and spoke model, and then we have 4 large data science teams, which are the financial planning analysis, clinical, provider, and then service and delivery teams. And then we have a couple of smaller teams as well as members of kind of what we consider the advanced analytics community. Okay, so where are we actually located, and why have we made the specific choices that we've made? And I'll talk through each of these in turn. So first of all is execution, right? So what we've done is we basically let all the business unit area data science teams have full control over what they choose to do or not. So we actually don't tell them what to do. But at the same time, we don't even have a marketing analytics team at our company. I mean, that's hard to believe, right? So yes, I know. So guess what? We have to do that, right? Because this is such a giant gap. And the marketing folks don't want to stand up their own data science team, so we should do it. So we're basically going across the entire company and we're saying, where are the gaps? What can we execute in the short term while we stand up this hub and spoke model, right? So we're working a lot with the government team, the pharmacy team that we just stood up. We're collaborating with them. But then there are other areas of opportunity for us. So this is actually where we think we want to be long term, because the gaps will close, so we'll do less and less, and execution will be pushed towards the spokes. The second one is hiring and recruiting. And so right now, we standardize the process. And so if you apply for any data science position on our website or through any other channel, you actually go through exactly the same process. You get exposed to every single data science team, right? And everyone chips into the recruiting. That way, you don't have to play roulette and guess, okay, out of these postings, which one actually is the best fit for me? So you learn about the teams, and then we actually do a matching process where certain teams can decide not to hire you because you're not a good fit. But if multiple teams offer you, you actually get to pick which team you want to be on. Right? The goal there is to optimize for retention, because you had a choice, you picked the one that you thought had the most interesting problems and probably the best cultural fit for you. Talent, so right now, people will just basically apply for positions internally if they want to move around. We actually are starting a rotational program early next year. So the idea there is that it's really helpful for people to not just focus on a narrow set of problems, but for them to actually be able to expose to a variety of problems. Also helps with retention. Compensation, so we want to move towards a central model. What we've actually done is our team is responsible for making sure that we're competitive in terms of our salary ranges. So we drive all the reviews with HR. In terms of entry-level offers, we've standardized all of that. So every team has agreed this is exactly what we should offer people coming in entry-level and near entry-level. Technology, so right now we do have platforms that we bring in and we fund, but we don't say what people can and can't use, right? So if they actually want to build a linear regression model in Excel and have that be their production, we actually do that. Or if they want to use certain legacy tools, 3 letters that I won't name, they are free to do that. We won't push them off those platforms or tools, but we obviously don't promote or sponsor it at all. But we actually do want to get to a place where we tell them, look, you can't use these tools because of reasons of model management or reproducibility or scalability. Practices. So right now, we pretty much model how data science should be practiced. So as an example, my team is the only team that has product managers right now. And so the challenge with data science really is how do you operationalize and productionalize it and actually get people to accept your solutions. And so with this product management role, these are people that we've hired into that role that really understand data science, but then are completely business facing. So they don't code at all, but they can actually say this is actually possible to build using data science and this isn't possible to build. So what we don't want is we don't want to build more dashboards and reports. We also don't want to make crazy promises of AI, transforming the organization in 3 years. So our product managers work very closely with our business partners, and that we've actually found a lot of success. So I think someone threw out a statistic that over half of data science models that are meant to go into production don't go into production. I think organizationally, we're roughly around 80% right now. So we're beating kind of the benchmarks. And part of that is because of the product manager role. Education, so I would kind of just like to have more standard curriculum and training. Right now, it's kind of every man for himself. If people want to go to conferences, that's mainly what they can do. They want to take online classes. Obviously, there's tuition for that. Strategy, that's kind of something that only my team actually is focusing on right now. I would like to bring in the hub and spokes, but right now they're very focused on core operational things, but getting input from them is helpful. And then community, I'll talk a little bit about why we prioritize this first, is we fund a lot of things to make sure that people actually know what everyone else is doing. Okay, so how did we actually decide when I started the COE, what did we actually focus on first? So I basically treat it as a backlog. Here are all the things I want to do. Clearly, I can't come in and say we're going to do all of them, right? So what we want to do is first figure out what our biggest problems are, and then basically say, size it, right? Kind of think of agile fashion. Okay, how long is it going to take me to actually implement this? And then if I do look at that trade-off, then what should actually be number one, and what should I execute on first? So I came up with this really recruiting and hiring, because we had so much need for growth that we were going to hire, I don't know, like 40 data science positions this year, that we wanted to bring that under control, because we didn't want people going out and hiring, having different standards for what a data scientist was, and then also making sure that we were competitive and actually could get a lot of applicants. So just to give you some stats, we've actually received around 8,000 applications for our data science positions. A lot of that is through our university recruiting. So we have around 10 target schools that we're actually visiting later this year and early next year. And then our recruiters, so we've got two, like 1.5. She's really good. She's actually screened over 500 candidates at this point. And then we have a bunch of other things that we kind of do, like a phone screening, a case study. And then for home office interviews, we've brought in around 60 candidates, and then we've made offers to around 35 of them, and we've had around 25 to 30 accept. So if you kind of look at, the high 8,000 number, which is really high because actually probably more than half don't actually qualify to be a data scientist. I like to tell my folks it's actually harder to get into Blue Cross Blue Shield as a data scientist to get into Harvard. So they're very pleased with that. Yeah, it's true. If you look at the 8,000, probably the more realistic number is that 500 number that our recruiter actually decides that she should call and talk to. And then priority number two, and this is just because it was such a low-cost thing, was prior to the formation of the Center of Excellence, like people didn't even talk to each other. Like, I would go like 6 months without talking to the director of the other data science teams, right? So we were just so focused on serving our business areas that we didn't, like, I was leading the provider team at the time. I didn't care what the clinical team did, right? Unless there was some sort of clash, right? I didn't care what the SEO team did. I'm just gonna focus on my business customers. So that presents some challenges. So we just wanted to make people talk to each other. And one really easy way to do that is just have social events. So as an example, we had our all-day company data science meeting just last Thursday. And so there were 70 attendees. And so we started that event at 7 a.m. and then we went to 6 p.m. But then there were still 30 people that went out for drinks afterwards, and they were out until like 10 p.m. So having a community that's really tight means that people are comfortable with each other, right? So they're willing to spend 15 hours with the same people. And so if you're that comfortable, then you're much more willing to reach out and say, hey, look, I'm working on this problem. I heard maybe through the grapevine that you're working on something similar. What are some things that you can maybe teach me or code that I can reuse, right? So this is a loose way to do it. This is not the governed way, but in many ways, it's just as effective. If you're starting OCE, what are the three things you need? So really quickly, number one, you need executive sponsorship. This generally means someone in the C-suite who's a driver and will actively promote the Center of Excellence. And then secondly, the CEO obviously can't be opposed to that, right? Because otherwise it'll fall through. The second one is you actually need someone or a team that can do organizational transformation, right? So they can't just be good at the data science, they actually have to be able to manage the politics and be able to influence other teams informally. And finally, you actually have to be good at data science, which is surprising, right? Because I see a lot of CEOs stood up where maybe there's an executive, he just read about data science in Harvard Business Review, and now he decides that he should start the Center of Excellence, right? Those generally tend to fail because what happens is without formal authority, if a non-data scientist tells the data scientist what to do, the data scientist is going to be like, go pound sand, right? And so I've seen a surprising number of COEs fail for this reason. So you actually do need data scientists to lead the COE. Some best practices for the COE. So number one, do act like a servant leader. So if you're the Center of Excellence, you actually have to constantly consult with all of your spoke teams. And the way that we do this is actually through a steering committee, right? So there's all the directors and higher of the different data science teams. There's actually 8 or 9 now. We have bi-weekly meetings where we get together and we basically say, okay, here are some things that we're working on, and we try to get consensus and move forward with changes that we're initiating across the company. The second one is just actively involve everyone. And so sometimes we have something we want to do as a COE, we don't do it ourselves, we actually tell one of the spoke teams to go do it, and they take full responsibility and they actually try to drive that forward. The third one is over-communicate. So we have, this is just say it over and over again. I heard someone say that you actually have to say something 6 or 7 times on average before someone actually gets that you're serious about a change rather than just spouting lip service. And the fourth one is really just openly share credit. So when I go and talk to anyone, internally or externally, I do talk about what the other teams, not just my team, is actually doing, right? So making sure that they feel like they're being recognized, and it's not just all about the hub. And then the fifth one, which is kind of a key point, which is you can't really get into turf wars with your spoke teams, right? So if you have a spoke team that is sitting within, let's say, a business function or product, and they consider some work to be core to that area, and they're like, I need to do this, then you basically say yes, even if you're doing it now. You just hand it over. I'm very explicit with my team. If they ask and want to take something over, there is no argument. We are going to give it to them. Because otherwise, you're going to get into wars, and they're basically not going to see you as an enabling force or helping force. They're going to see you as internal competition, and you don't want that. So the way that you kind of get this formally recognized is you write into your goals, which is that from your goals, you actually need to be indifferent between enabling or helping other teams accomplish something versus doing it yourself. So either or. If you enable $5 million of business value, that's the same as doing it yourself. And once you have that mindset, then it automatically takes you out of, I have to actually compete for resources or use cases to execute on. Okay, so some other practical considerations, and these are some ones that are pop up a lot, which is the number one, which is where should the center of excellence sit? And my answer to this is actually it really doesn't matter, and I'll use Blue Cross Blue Shield as an example, right? So the center of excellence was actually started under the IT team. But then we had a reorg, and now we're separate in an analytics organization. What's changed? Actually, nothing has changed. So from my perspective, I don't think this actually matters. You should sit wherever you can get the most executive support. So I think this is more of an intellectual exercise. So the second one I talked about a little bit, so I'm going to skip over that. So how should I structure the team in my COE? So if you're a relatively immature organization and you're like, okay, how should I build out my COE? I would say actually build it out in a way that it mirrors what you would like to see the spokes have, which is basically a delivery team. And so if you have a model like us where we have product managers, but none of the other teams have product managers, the goal there is we'll hire the first product managers, we'll show that this model actually works, and then once it works, have the other teams say, okay, this is actually successful, you're not just telling me to do something because it works on a piece of paper. Then they'll naturally adopt that, because what we're seeing now is that the other teams are actually posting product manager positions because they're facing adoption challenges that they see our PMs being able to overcome because that's their core function. So I talked about the fourth one a little bit, and then the fifth one is really just kind of informal authority, learning how to work with people and having them see you as helping them rather than basically dictating things top down. So this is intended to take around 10 to 15 minutes. So let me just kind of describe what this is. So this is my very simplified version of what we just talked about. And what I would like you to do is fill this out for your organization and then pick a partner. And so talk with them. So if you don't want to do this exercise, maybe you can come up with some funny stories about failed COEs or very successful COEs. And then during discussion period, let's share those with a group. So this is a word cloud for those of you that are still logged on your computer or on your cell phone. Feel free to text what your biggest challenges are. And let's see how this word cloud ends up looking like. Okay, we'll wait a bit. So while it's happening and people are having a chance to text, does anyone want to share any stories or have any questions or discussion topics they would like to kick off?
It's not a funny story, but it's a morbid question. And I usually find that the role of managing a data science center of excellence is very different from the role of a senior data scientist. And I often see successful teams having challenges scaling. So you end up with somebody who is playing like a super product manager role and has a span of 30 people underneath them. And the question arises, well, so what happens if you get hit by a bus? Like, who is it who can stand in for you if something, God forbid, happens? As a way of getting people to think about, well, they should be looking to offload a lot of that work and build a structure that can scale further. I was wondering how you go about that. Would you be looking to one of your product managers to be taking over after you, or a senior data scientist, or how does that work?
So his question is, what happens if I get hit by a bus, right? So it is very morbid. Hopefully that doesn't happen to me. So I do actually have people like leading some of the other spoke data science teams, and so they have, I would say they probably have some of those same qualities that would make managing the Center of Excellence successful. And so actually I think ideally you would, if you're building a Center of Excellence, the easiest way to actually identify talent is to take someone who's really effective from the spokes and put them in that role, because they already have the credibility with some of the other teams. They know the organization, right, which are some of the requirements that you need to have a successful COE. So I'm not going to name any names specifically, but there are probably 1 or 2 people that could definitely step in if I were hit by a bus. I've been hit by a car before. I'm still here. Okay. So the way you phrased it sounds like I'm dead after getting hit by this bus. Sorry, what's your name, since you're asking so many questions?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Paul Zaretsky. Work in healthcare too. It's that
Okay.
kind of stuff. So two-part question on an individual level and a team level. Do you have a lean towards kind of a full stack data scientist and data engineer, someone who's kind of a master of all trades, or jack of all trades, master of none? And then also the second part would be, are you also building a DevOps data engineering team when you're building a data science team?
So I think the first presentation of the day was about how you don't want that, and I would agree. If you try to if you try to hire someone like that, first of all, you're going to pay them way more than a company like us can afford. So we don't, right? So it's kind of, we've taken the approach that was described in the first presentation of the day. Second one is, are we trying to do DevOps? So that's something we have to resolve, because we absolutely want to get better at front-end development, because we are product focused, right? So a lot of times we don't have enough strength there. So then the question is, and I don't know if the people talking about IT is going to talk about this, right? So do you use your internal IT team, or do you actually go out and get contractors who can kind of build that stuff out for you? And then the DevOps, I think we definitely, if I think of things like machine learning DevOps, which is like productionalizing and maintaining and making sure your models are running smoothly and scaling and all this other stuff, yeah, that's absolutely something that we have our data science engineers do. Technically, I think most people consider like a machine learning engineer role. We just haven't broken those out separately from data engineer versus machine learning engineer.
Thank you.
Is there any area specifically that you're interested in?
So first of all, I want to know how many models you deploy.
Yeah. I don't think it's about the number of models. So someone did come with an example, I think, where like you could have thousands of models. It's really about like what the value of that model can deliver. So sometimes you have a single model, it's fantastic, it solves a really pressing challenge, right? So let me give you an example. So one of the spoke teams, they just recently deployed an appeals forecasting model. So for Medicare, there are members that call in with appeals, right? And basically the idea is, how many people do I need to staff to handle these appeals? And so they deployed a model for that. We've got, I don't know, I think we recently had an all-community meeting. I think by my count, I mean, there's probably like 30 or 35 that people are actively working on, or are close to, either in production or are very, very close to production. We're kind of at the point where generally we fail for 2 reasons. The first one is because the actual ML model isn't good enough. So sometimes you have marginal improvement over the existing models, and so actually changing the process to deploy your ML model is not going to be that beneficial. So one example of that is, we recently worked on trying to better identify opioid abusers. And so we built an ML model, and there was an existing model in place that had a risk score for the members. And we found actually, even though we were be able to do better, it just wasn't good enough to change kind of the workflow just to deploy that model. It wasn't because like we didn't identify the business users or how it was going to be used. Do we have time for one more? Or is it the break? Okay.
Let's do the break. You'll be here, right?
I'll be here. Okay, just come up to me afterwards.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much. That was a great presentation.